continuing our limud of Megillas Esther, and we are up to Perek Tes. So what happened was, Haman has been hung. The base Haman was given to Esther, who gave it to Mordechai. Achashverosh gave Mordechai the tabas. Esther begs to repeal the gezerah that the Jews are going to be killed on the 13th of Adar. Achashverosh cannot repeal that gezerah. The Goyim will have the right to kill the Jews. But he legalizes the right of the Jews to fight back, and not only fight back, but to go after the enemies even if they don't attack the Yidden, and including the Taf and the Nashim, and the Shalal, the spoils, can be taken by the Jews. These letters were issued on the 23rd of Sivan of the 12th year of Ahasuerus' reign, and they spread fairly quickly. And now we have the actual story of what happens on the 13th day of Adar, when the Zaman of the genocide arrives. So Perek Tes, Pasuk Aleph says, Ubishnei Mosor Chaydesh Hu Chaydesh Adar, the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Remember, the old way of counting is numbering the months from Nisan. The new way of counting are the names of the Chadashim that we got in Bavel. And therefore the book of Esther gives you both the old dating and the new dating. And it came the 13th of Adar, Asher Higia Devar HaMelech V'daseh Le'asos. This is the day that all of the king's decrees, the first letter of Haman and the second letter of Mordechai, the time has come. What's going to happen? And that was Bayom. This was the day. Asher Sibru Oivei Ayehudim Lishleit Bahem, that the enemies of the Jews thought they would rule over the Jews, meaning by killing them. And what happened was the opposite. V'napochu. Right, this is a famous Purim song. It was reversed. Asher Yishletu Ayehudim Hema B'Seinehem, that the Jews were able to rule over their enemies. How did that happen? Nikalu haYehudim bi'oreihem b'chol medinos hamelech Achashverosh. The Jews gathered together in all of their cities throughout the countries of Achashverosh, the 127 provinces, lishloach yad, to send forth their hand, b'mevakshei ra'asam, against all of those who sought their evil. V'ish lo amad lifneihem, and nobody was able to stop them. Ki nafal pachtam al kol ha'amim, the nations were afraid to wage war. So again, let me explain this. The Igros Shniyos did not only allow the Jews to defend themselves from people who are attacking them, that they would have done anyway, but it allowed them aggressively to seek out those who wanted to destroy them. Now, halachically, this is extremely difficult to understand. I can kill a rodef who's trying to kill me. But if somebody's not trying to kill me, I can't simply say, you're an anti-Semite, I'm killing you. So what heter would there be, l'shleach yad? I mean, good, Achashverosh gave him a heter, but l'maisa, what halachic heter would there be to simply go out and kill somebody because he's an anti-Semite? So there are two possibilities. One possibility is that even the people who weren't attacking him on that day were planning pogroms or planning to attack the Jews some other time when the Jews are not going to have the protection of the army. And therefore, halachically, those people are rodfim, and I can kill them. Just like you can kill a Hamas leader, even though he's eating dinner or sleeping. because he's planning Redifa. Or the other alternative, although the pasuk doesn't say it, but many Meforshim understand this, that the Mavakshe Ra'asim are Amalekim. And there is a mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. What's shver about that is that it says they killed 75,000 people. We're going to see that later. It's not shayach from Agag that you had 75,000 people. It's mashma like Haman is like the last one, or whatever. So it's either an expanded definition of Rodef, or these are Amalekim. And l'chayra, killing Taf and Nashim, if that's what they did, we're going to read it, is only going to work out Samalek. You can't kill the Taf and Nashim of a Rodef unless they themselves are Rodfim. So the chiddush here is that we're not just defending ourselves, but we're sholeach yad b'mavakshe ra'asam. And even in terms of defending, yes, the Goyim have reshus to kill us. But once our right of self-defense has been legalized, not just de facto, but legalized, the Chayalei HaMelech can assist us in repelling the threat. And that's what Pasuk Gimel says. V'chol sorei hamedinais, v'o chashtar panim v'hapachos v'osei amlacha shel HaMelech. All of the governing officials, again, there's a lot of bureaucracy in Persia, v'o chashtar panim, pachot, osei amlacha, those who were in charge of taxes and revenue, Menasim, they lifted up the Jews, meaning they protected them. So, number one, very few people would attack the Jews knowing this, but number two, those who did attack, they were subject to defense by the armies and police, whatever it was, under the control of these Achashtar Panim. Ki Gadol Mordechai b'Beis HaMelech, Mordechai was very great in the house of the king. V'shamo holech b'chol ha'medinos, his reputation had spread to the provinces. Ki ish Mordechai holech v'gadol, Mordechai became greater and greater and greater. And therefore, Einochin Nami, once again, the Gezerah of Haman could not be repealed because nothing that the king issues is ever repealable. But by legalizing the right of self-defense, the Yidden now have the protection of the government. So yeah, if the guy killed a Jew, he could not be prosecuted, but the government could fight on behalf of the Jews to prevent that from happening. Okay, that's the chiddush of the second Igros. And the Jews could even be proactive against their enemies. Makas Cherev, with the sword, Herod, killing, Avdan, eradication, V'yasu b'senem kirtzonim, they could do whatever they wanted to do. And now we're given numbers. Ubeshushan Habira, in Shushan, the capital, Horgo HaYehudim, the Jews were able to kill, v'yabed, and destroy, Chamesh Me'asish, 500 people. Now again, it's not clear to us, are these Amalekim? Are these people who were actively trying to kill them? Are these people who were not actively trying to kill them, but maybe they were hatching some pogroms, and they were killed al Sreidev? It doesn't say, but we are told that they killed on the 13th of Adar in Shushan 500 people, and then they also killed the 10 sons of Haman. So Haman was killed second day of Pesach. The 10 sons of Haman were killed on the 13th of Adar, and it mentions, and the Balkorei reads this in one breath, because they were hung on a tree simultaneously. In other words, they were killed and hung on a tree, one right under the other, without a break. So this is read without a break. But I will read it with a break because I can't hold my breath so much. Ves Parshandasa, Ves Dalfain, Ves Aspasa, Ves Pairasa, Ves Adalia, Ves Aridasa, Ves Parmashta, Ves Arisai, Ves Aridai, Ves Vaizasa. These are 10 names. Aseres b'nei Haman ben Amdas Yehudim Marago, they killed the Aseres b'nei Haman, and they hung them up. By the way, there is a cheshbon here. If you look in the Megillah, Parshandasa, there's a small tuf, a small letter. Parmashta is a small shin. Vaizasa, there is a small zayin. So those small letters spell tuf, shin, zayin, which actually was the year of the Nuremberg trials after World War II, in which Nazi leaders were hung. And that's a remez here in the Aseres B'nai Haman for a Taliyah. And indeed, one of the Nazis, I think it was Julius Streicher Yimach Shmo, as he was being hung, his last words were, Purim Fest! The Jews are celebrating Purim again. Now in Vaizasa, there is not only a small zayin, there is a large vav, and that's a remez that their 10 bodies were arrayed one under the other like a long vav. And that's also why we read it b'neshima achas, in one breath, because they were hung one right under the other. And these are the Aseres B'nai Haman, but it emphasizes uba biza lo yisholchu es yadam. So this is very important. Even though the royal edict of Achashverosh gave the Jews the right to seize the spoils, they did not take the property of anyone that they killed. And this was designed to make a Kiddush Hashem that we're not doing it for the money. Now some want to say, halachically they couldn't take it because it was the shalal of Amalek, meaning Bishlama in the case of Esther taking Beis Haman, the property became Achashverosh's property, under the principle that one who is a marid b'malchus, his nechasim go to the melech. So Memela, Esther Hamalka got it from Achashverosh. But here, these are not maridim b'malchus, these are just people the Jews are killing, al Samalek. So the property does not belong to the melech. So the Jews could not take it, uba biza lo yisholchu es yadam, because it's the property of Amalek. So we have a machlekes. Is it simply to show that we're not doing it for the money? Or is it halachically we weren't allowed to take it because it was the shalal of Amalek? So on the 13th of Adar, 500 people were killed. Plus 500, plus Aseres B'nai Haman. So that's 510. Bayomahu, on that very day, now again, reports from the rest of the kingdom we'll have to get later, but that very day in Shushan, the report of the people who were killed came before the Melech. Vayomer HaMelech l'Esther HaMalka, and the king said to Esther, his queen, Bashushan Abira harga Yehudim v'abeit chamesh me'os ish. I see that by virtue of my royal edict, the Jews were able to kill 500 of their enemies, and as far as we know, not a single Jew died. V'es Aseres B'nai Haman, and the 10 sons of Haman. And Bishar Medina Samelech, and what happened in the rest of my kingdom? Ma'asu, I don't know what they did, meaning if they killed 500 in Shushan, there would be so many more in the other Medinas. As Baruch Hashem, everything you wanted to have accomplished has been accomplished. And therefore, once again, he says to Esther that whom he loves. Now, this is interesting, because I had suggested a possibility that when Esther introduced Mordechai to the king, she told him that he was her husband, and maybe Achashverosh released her. So it could be in such a situation. Maybe she's not really his wife. He's not Achashverosh's wife anymore, but she still has access. I don't know. There's a lot of unknown questions here. A lot of things to think about. We read the Megillah every year, twice. And even in Pashat Pshat, there are a lot of things we don't know. Now, but once again he asks Esther, Ma she'lasech v'yinasein lach. What are you asking for? It will be given to you. Uma ba'kosha seich, what is your request? Od v'teyas, it will be done. It's very interesting. You have to be medayik here. this is the first and only time where he doesn't qualify his rishus by saying, up to half of my kingdom will I give you. Meaning up to half, but not the thing in the middle, meaning I'm not going to allow the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Here, he doesn't say that. So it's interesting. Should she have asked for the building of the second Mikdash? You know, the Gemara says a similar thing with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he could have asked Aspasionis, who said, whatever you want, I'll give you. And he said, spare Rabban Gamliel, spare Yavne, spare Rav Tzadok, who needs medical treatment. Chazal say, why didn't he ask for the Mikdash? And one opinion says, Hashem took away that chachma. The other opinion says, he thought to Fasta Meruba, he shouldn't ask for too much. I'm wondering, again, I have more questions than answers. Is the omission of Chatzei HaMalchus a remes that Esther could have asked for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, which was built under her son, but not under Achashverosh? And she didn't ask, because she doesn't ask for it. Instead, she says, Vataymer Esther. Esther asks for another day of rishus to fight and kill enemies. Im ala melech tov, if it is good with the king, Yinasein gam machar la Yehudim asher b'Shushan, may the king give us tomorrow, the 14th of Adar, in Shushan only, lasais kedas hayayim, that we can do like we did today, meaning apparently there are enemies in Shushan that Esther is aware of, who are planning pogroms or incitements against the Jews. Maybe they're Amalekim or maybe they're Rodfim. It's not clear what halachic principle is in effect here. But she says we want to be able to kill them, and again, that would mean with royal support. And similarly, we want the 10 sons of Haman, who were Rishayim, to be hung a second day. Vayomer HaMelech le'asos ken. The king authorized it. Now, it doesn't say it was in writing, so it's interesting. Vatinosein das b'Shushan. The law was proclaimed in Shushan. V'yes aseres b'nei Haman talu. And the 10 sons of Haman were hung for a second day. And now it explains what happened on the 14th of Adar in Shushan only. Vayikalu haYehudim asher b'Shushan. The Jews of Shushan gathered together, Gam b'yom arba'asar l'chodesh Adar. They gathered again on the 14th of the month of Adar. Vayargu b'Shushan shalosh me'osish. They killed an additional 300 people. Now it's interesting, both the 500 and the 300, it does not say they killed Taf and Nashim, even though it was authorized. It does not say they killed Taf and Nashim. And it once again says, Uba biza lo sholchu et yadam. They did not send forth their hands on the biza, on the spoils, on the shalal, either because they wanted to show that we're not doing this for money. People accuse Jews of being greedy today, even today. Or number 2, if these people were for Amalek, the shalal of Amalek is prohibited. So this is what happened in Shushan. On the 13th of Adar, we were given rishus and we killed 500. And the next day we uprooted 300 enemies. What about the other countries? Now this was written later, of course. Ushar hayudim asher b'medinos hamelech. The rest of the Jews in the other medinot, nikalu v'yamod al nafsham. They gathered together to defend themselves. V'nayach me'ayveim, and to get rest from their enemies. V'harag b'sneim, and they killed their enemies. Chamisha v'shivim elef. On the 13th of Adar, they killed 75,000 people. And once again it says, Ubabiza loy sholchu et yadam. They did not take any of the spoils. Again, the issue is very difficult. 75,000 people. Are we talking about these are the people who were waging war against them? So we killed them as rodfim? Or are these people that we searched out as potential future rodfim? Or are these people Mizera Amalek? Could there be so many Amalekim? And especially if you say we didn't take the Biza of 75,000, if the halachic reason is Amalek, are all 75,000 Amalek? Which implies, in other words, that the reason is a separate reason of Kiddush Hashem, that they shouldn't think the Jews did it for the money. Now, when did they kill the 75,000? Biyom Shalaisha Asar L'Chodesh Adar. That was the 13th day of Adar. V'nayach B'arba Asar Bai. And everywhere else, they only killed on the 13th of Adar. They got the mission done. They rested on the 14th of Adar. V'yasa Oso. And they made the 14th of Adar. Now, this is the very first year. This was spontaneous. This was not a takana of the Chachamim. On the day that they rested from war, they made it a day. On that year, the first year, Mishta, rejoicing. Mishta is actually partying, a day of partying, coming from the notion of wine, drinking wine, v'simcha. Again, it's been pointed out many times that we don't celebrate. Yidden do not celebrate the day of a military victory. We celebrate the shalom that comes after the victory. The military victory was on the 13th, but the day of Mishta v'Simcha is on the 14th. Now, with respect to Shushan, HaYehudim asher b'Shushan nikalu b'shloisha asar bai. They assembled in battle on the 13th, u'bi'arba asar bai, and on the 14th, v'nayach, and they rested on the 15th, called Shushan Purim, v'yasa oso, and they made the 15th. Again, on that year, we are not yet talking about Purim as a holiday. We're simply saying that year they celebrated on the 15th. So, this is only about Shushan. Now, Pasuk Yutes then says, it's an enigmatic Pasuk. Now, this is a Pasuk that's already referring to later when Purim became a Yom Tov. Okay. Because of the distinction between Shushan and everywhere else, HaYehudim HaPchazim HaYoshvim Bi'arei HaPrazos, the Jews who live in open cities without walls, Osim es Yom Arba Asor LaChodesh Adar, they make, this is already a reference to when it became a holiday, they make the 14th of Adar, Simcha, a day of joy, Mishta, partying, that's a meal, V'Yom Tov, a festive day, U'mishloach manos ish l're'eyu, and the custom of sending food from one person to another. Now, what does this mean? We discussed Shushan, and we discussed everywhere else, and then it says, the open cities make Purim on the 14th. When do the walled cities make Purim? What's going on? Because really, it's only Shushan that has a reason for the 15th. Walled cities don't have a reason. Yerushalayim has no reason for the 15th. So the Ramban is masber this way. The Ramban is masber that although the very first year, everybody spontaneously had a party, they were relieved. In Shushan, the party was on the 15th. Everywhere else, it was on the 14th. But in future years, not every city thought Purim was important enough to make a permanent holiday. The Prazim are Jews who lived in open, unprotected areas. They were very vulnerable. It would be very possible for enemies to attack them, and therefore they were margish that Hashem gave them a great, great Yeshua. The Mukafim, i.e. walled cities, this means walled cities of Jews, even though they were grateful because they could have been attacked, etc., but they didn't feel a need for a permanent holiday because they thought they were not really in sakana, because they were safe behind a wall. Therefore, the holiday of Purim was observed by open cities on the 14th and by Shushan on the 15th. This is the Ramban. And in the walled cities, meaning walled cities of Jews, they didn't observe it at all after the very first Purim because they thought it wasn't a Yom Tov, or at least they were planning not to observe it. So we're going to see that Mordechai, in the name of the Sanhedrin, said that Purim is a mandatory observance, but because the Mukafin were not willing to do it on their own, they were denigrated in kavod, that the Prazim were given the first day, and the Mukafin were knocked down to the second day. So this is very, very fascinating. The reason why cities with a wall keep Purim on the 15th is not, this is very important, is not the same reason why Shushan itself keeps Purim on the 15th. Shushan keeps Purim on the 15th because that is the day they rested, because they fought on 13 and 14. Walled cities like Yerushalayim only on the 13th. They didn't fight on the 14th. But the reason they keep it on the 15th is they were relegated to an inferior position of second place because they didn't take on the observance of Purim on their own. So a lot of people don't realize this. We call the 15th Shushan Purim, but the halacha is all walled cities keep it on the 15th, but not for the same reason as Shushan. This is how the Ramban explains it. Now, there happens to be a technicality which doesn't really fit the reasons, and that is, even if it didn't have a wall in the time of Achashverosh, if it had a wall in the days of Yeshua ben Nun, it reads on the 15th, even though the Ramban's reason doesn't apply, but this is how the halacha works. And theoretically, that even applies to a Chutz La'aretz city. Some say Prague had a wall all the way back. And in Eretz Yisrael, there are going to be a lot of sfeikas, because some areas might have had a wall from the days of Yoshua ben Nun. Also, there's a whole shaila that even if it didn't have a wall, but if it's within the Techum, or it's visible, so, for example, most of Yerushalayim today, outside of the old city, did not have a wall, but it's close enough in an unbroken stream of houses to the old city. So the issue of when do you keep it the 15th, when you keep it the 14th, is a complicated, complex area. New areas like Ramot, comparatively new areas. You have the Shaila. Some people read it both days. Even Beit Shemesh is an issue. So I'm not going to get into the halachos here, but the one nikud I want to make is that the original observance of Purim beyond the first year did not encompass the Mukafim at all, because they said they weren't in danger. And that's why Mordechai had to make a special takana. You'll also notice that the way Purim was described is they made it in the Prazim, the open cities, simcha, joy, mishta, feasting, Yom Tov, which means they originally were going to keep it as a Yom Tov where you didn't do malacha. Now Yom Tov is going to drop out, but Yom Tov was originally part of it. Shalach Manas was part of it. It does not mention Matanais Li'Avyainim, right? So that was the original way the holiday was observed, only by the Prazim. Now, Pasuk Chaf then says, Vayichtayv Mordechai es hadvorim ha'ela. Mordechai wrote up the whole story of Purim. That's the Megillah that we're reading. Vayishlach svarim el kol ha'yehudim sholcho medinas hamelech Achashverosh. And he sent this Megillah to all of the kingdom of Achashverosh, to the Jews, HaKrevim, the near ones, HaRechaikim. And what was his takana? L'kayem aleihem, lios eisen, es yom arba asor lachodesh ador, v'es yom chamisha asor bai b'chol shana v'shana. So essentially, what Mordechai is doing, and this is with the authority of the Sanhedrin, it's not just him, he's a member of the Sanhedrin, is that Purim is a mandatory holiday. Instead of just the Prazim keeping it, the Mukafim have to keep it, albeit on the 15th. That the 14th is a day of Purim and the 15th is a day of Purim, and everybody must observe it. It now becomes a mandatory Yom Tov. Kayamim, as it was observed on the actual time of the Nes, where everybody rested on the 14th, but Shushan rested on the 15th. They must keep Purim like the days that they actually rested from their enemies. Again, Jews do not celebrate the day of victory, they celebrate the day of Shalom. And this was the month, Asher Ne'apach Lahem, that it was reversed, Miyagon, from grieving to Simcha, Me'evel, from mourning, M-O-U-R, Liyom Tov, to holiday. And these days shall become. Now notice how Mordechai reformulates the Yom Tov. L'asosesam, to make the days of Purim, Yemei Mishta, feasting, that's the Seuda, Simcha, joy, Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyeyu, sending food to your friend, Umatanos Lievyonim, and gifts to the poor. Yeah, I just want to point out again that Mordechai made some shinuyim in the way Purim was originally observed by the Orei HaPrazim. Number one, Mordechai extended the observance to the cities with walls, albeit they were classified with Shushan, although a different reason than Shushan. Number two, the Prazim initially wanted Purim to be a Yom Tov that is forbidden b'malacha. Mordechai took out Yom Tov. He kept Simcha, Mishta, Mishloach Manot. He took out Yom Tov, but he added Matanos Liavyonim, and this is the great mitzvah on Purim, that you give gifts for tzedakah. Remember, Sholach Manot are two different foods, two different brachos, to one person. Manot ish l'reyehu. Matanos lievyonim are you give some tzedakah to at least two people. And this is Mordechai's takana, again from the Sanhedrin. And Pasuk Chav Gimel says, Mordechai's takana was accepted. V'kibel ha-Yehudim eis asher echelu lasot. The Jewish people accepted what they had begun doing, because remember, they had begun observing Purim, at least the present, spontaneously on their own. So they continued to do what they had agreed to spontaneously, but as redefined by Mordechai, v'eis asher kasav Mordechai aleim. Meaning, Purim started as a spontaneous observance. Mordechai gave it a certain structure, and when the Jewish people continued their spontaneous observance, they followed the structure that Mordechai gave to the Chag. And now we have a little bit of a summary. What is Purim commemorating? So, Pasuk Chavdalev, Ki Haman ben Amdaso Hagagi. This is the last mention of Haman, so it's often very loud in Shul. Haman ben Amdaso Hagagi, Terer HaYudim, Kol HaYudim, the one who was the enemy of all of the Jews, Chashav al Yehudim liabdam, he planned to destroy the Jewish people. V'hipil por, he drew lotteries, he drew a lot. Por is the Persian word, which in Hebrew is the goral. Lohumam uliabdam, to confuse them and to destroy them. Ubabaya lifnei hamelech, but when Esther HaMalka came before the king, that was in the second Mishnah, Omar, the king said, Ima Sefer, with a written document, meaning he authorized Mordechai to send a second letter, Yoshuv machshavto hara al sharav Yehudim al rosho, may his evil thought go back on him, v'salu oso v'yaspanav oletz, and he and his sons were hung on the eights. Now, this is l'chayra, not literal, because Haman was hung on the second day of Pesach, on the tree, or the wood, the pole, that he prepared for Mordechai. The Aseres B'nai Haman were hung on the 13th of Adar, which was 11 months, almost 11 months later. But it means, B'sach HaKol, the rishus that Haman wanted to do to us happened to him and his children. But it doesn't mean he and his sons were hung on the same tree. Okay? And therefore, this is a summary. Karu liyamim ha'ele purim. These are called the days of lotteries, because the rishus began with the lottery, in which Haman got the month of Adar, which he thought was such a bad month for the Jewish people, because that was the month of Moshe Rabbeinu's death. But his mistake was, it was a month of Yeshua as well, because it was the month of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth. And therefore these days are called lotteries, the days of lottery. Al Shem HaPor, because of the lots. Right, so that's one thing. That's why these days are called Purim. Now, next thing, you got to put a period after Pur. Al Kain, and because of Dikol Divrei Hoigeres Hazos, because of all of the details that we are given in this story, in this letter, Ma Ra'u Al Kacha, and all that was seen by the Yidden, Umahi Gialem, and all that happened to the Yidden, because of that, so you have to connect it to the next pasuk. This is Sof Pasuk, but it's connected to Kiyamu V'Kiblu HaYehudim. The Jewish people accepted upon themselves V'al Zaram, and on their children, V'al Kol HaNilvam Aleim, and anyone that adds themselves to the Jewish people. That means Gerim. V'lo Yavor, to never pass. This is why Chazal say that even if all of the Yamim Tovim are going to be batal when Mashiach comes, V'lo Yavor, Purim will never pass. Lios Osim, that we're going to celebrate Shnei HaYamim Ha'ela, these 2 days, the 14th for the open cities, the 15th for Shushan and the walled cities, Kichsavam, in accordance with what is written in the Megillah, V'chizmanam, in accordance with the times of the Megillah, B'chol Shana V'Shana, every single year. Now, Chazal have a drasha on Kiyamu V'Kiblu, that even though in Pshuto Shel Mikra it is certainly referring to they accepted the holiday of Purim, but Chazal say it's going on the Torah as a whole. They accepted on Purim what they had previously accepted. Kiyamu, they accepted what they had previously accepted, and that is they re-accepted the Torah. Purim is a day of Kabbalah SaTorah, because the first time Hashem gave us the Torah, the Aseres HaDibros, He held the mountain over our heads and said, accept the Torah or I'll crush you. Kafa Aleim Har Kegigas. On Purim, out of gratitude to the Ribono Shel Olam, Hakaras HaTov, and love, we accepted out of love what we had previously accepted out of fear. So we often don't think of Purim this way. Purim is a day of Kabbalas HaTeira Mamish. Kiyamu Masha Kibbalu Aleim. Vayamim Ha'ela, and these days of Purim, Niskarim, are eternally remembered. V'nasim, and they are observed. So it's not clear when this was written, because this seems to imply we have a track record of Purims. So it could be that there were Haisafas to the Megillah, Anshe Knesset Hagdalah, or later. B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, mishpacha mishpacha, every family, medina medina, every country, ir v'ir, every city. V'mei apurim ha'elo yavitoch ha'yehudim. And the days of Purim shall never pass from the Jewish people. As I indicated, even when Mashiach comes, we will have Purim. V'zichram, the remembrance of the days of Purim. Lo Yosef Mizaram, will never perish from the people. Right? The holiday of Purim. So now we have a very peculiar thing. After telling us how beloved Purim is, how accepted Purim is, how everybody keeps Purim based on Mordechai's... It started off spontaneous, and Mordechai made a takana through the Sanhedrin. So then we are told that Esther wrote a second letter. Pasuk Chavtes. Vatichtaiv Esther Hamalka Bas Avichayil Umordechai Yehudi. Esther the Malka, together with Mordechai. Now it's interesting, the verb is singular feminine, so it doesn't say Vayichtavu. She wrote the letter and Mordechai, meaning she was the primary author, Mordechai was the secondary person. Es kol taikef, so es, Rashi says, means with all of her authority. Esther wrote a letter together with Mordechai with all of her authority, l'kayem, to establish Igeres HaPurim Hazais, the letter of Purim, the Megillah, Hashenis, she wrote it a second time. I'll read a few psukim, then I'll go back. And V'yishlach Sfarim al Kol HaYudim Shal Shavu Esther M'Mei Medina. The document of her letter was sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces. Divrei Shalom V'Emes, words of peace, meaning the letter was a letter of friendship, but it contained words of truth. And what did the second letter say? L'kayem es shemei apurim eile bismaneim, to accept the days of Purim in their proper time, the 14 and the 15. Kasher kiyam aleim Mordechai Yehudi v'Esther Hamalka, as Mordechai the Jew and Esther had already maintained in the first letter. In other words, the second letter says, do what you are told to do in letter number 1. Right, so do that. V'kasher kimu al nafsham, just as they had accepted on themselves and on their children, divrei hatzomos, the fast days, v'zakasam, and the prayers of the fast days. Now this is not referring to the fast of Esther. The fast of Esther, in fact, was not even a fast in Klal Yisrael until the time of the Geonim. But this refers to the fast days of Zechariah, the 9th of Av, Tammuz, Teves, Tzom Gedalia. They were accepted by Klal Yisrael. And in Esther's second letter, she's saying you should accept Purim the way you accept the fast days and their prayers over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Now, there is a big problem here. What is the purpose of Esther's second letter? Was there still a resistance? Meaning, maybe when it says everybody accepted Purim, the psukim are out of order. Maybe that's only after Esther's second letter. But why would that be so? So some want to say the following Mahalach. It's based on a Gemara. That Mordechai created a Yom Tov of Purim. Right? Mordechai said everything that has to be done on Purim. Mishta, a Seuda, Simcha, rejoicing, Mishleach Manais, Matanas Li'Evyainim. That's how Purim is observed. But do you note, Mordechai wrote the Megillah and sent the Megillah and contained this directive. But there's one thing Mordechai didn't say. Mordechai did not say that the Megillah itself is supposed to be read. Kriyas HaMegillah is actually not mentioned in Mordechai's letter. So some learn what Esther HaMalka is being meisif is Kriyas HaMegillah. That the Megillah, which is called Divrei Shalom, words of peace, reconciliation with Hashem and Emes, should be read. To be Makayim, to establish the days of Purim, means you memorialize it by Kriyas HaMegillah. Now, it could very well be, as the Torah Even says, the original Chiyuv of the Anshe Knesset Agdayla was only in the daytime, and night was added later, Midrabanan, but L'chol HaPachas. The Igeres Rishayna of Mordechai is Mishta, Simcha, Shalach Manais, and Matanas Li'Avyainim. The Igeres Shaniya of Esther is the Chiyuv of Kriyas HaMegillah. Now, I still have a kasha. Why does that second letter come from Esther? Why can't Mordechai write that letter too? Is it because this was Esther's idea, so she gets credit for it, even though Mordechai and the Sanhedrin are maskim? Again, a lot of questions. Now, the other thing that they say Esther was getting in her second letter was she wanted the Megillah, even though there's no longer Nevuah, she wanted the Megillah to be nichlal in Tanakh as Kisvei HaKadosh. Now that's a separate thing. There could be a chiyuv to read the Megillah, but lav dafka the Megillah is Kisvei HaKadosh. And her second letter is Kisvuni L'Dairos, let this be considered a Ruach HaKadosh document that is worthy of Kisvei HaKadosh. So that is what the second letter added. Kriyas HaMegillah and the kaviyas of the Megillah in Kisvei HaKadosh. Now, I have to say, to be honest, that if you read how the Megillah itself describes her letter, you don't necessarily see these 2 points. But that's how the Meforshim understand the tachlis of Esther's second letter. And this kind of concluded the structure of Purim. Umaymar Esther, the declaration of Esther, although Mordechai agreed to it, Kiyam, it firmly established Divrei HaPurim Ha'ela, these words of Purim, maybe that's a remiss to the reading of the Megillah, V'nichta b'Sefer, and the Megillah was written in the Sefer, so that actually fits. It was established in Kisvei HaKadosh. Nichtav, it was written b'Sefer. So that is the end of Perek Tes, which gives us a very, very detailed description of the evolution of the holiday of Purim, but we don't really know over how many years this structure took. So we're a little short on the actual dating.